So then going back to Dalen and Marcus, they walk way over to the slave quarters, which, I mean, these guys had to have had really good walking shoes on, because these guys were like, it was Lord of the Rings time. They were walking forever. But they can't get in the slave quarters. They're all locked down. They've got like bolts on each one of the doors outside. So they're basically just out in the open in this field and on this plantation. Padlocks, that's the word I was looking for. They're all padlocked. So they start an EVP session outside by a really big tree. When they start hearing something that kind of pulls them away from the tree in their EVP session and takes them back to the slave quarters. And what they heard was a knocking. Ooh. And they heard it twice. So they're like in the middle of an EVP session, like, would this be where you would, have come to rest under this big tree? This seems like a nice place. Mm-hmm. They got a knock over by the slave quarters. And they're like, whoa, what did you hear? And then like right away, another knock. And it's like, we need to go and check that out. So they go on over to the slave quarters. Dalen knocks on the door and he says, my name is Dalen, in like Louisiana French. Which I thought was a great idea, to kind of speak in a language that they, would have been familiar with.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but of course he says that and he's like, oh, I wasn't supposed to give my real name. Why would you give your real name? So he says it again in Louisiana French, but then he says, my name is Marcus instead. And Marcus is like, why'd you give him my name? He's like, well, because I gave him mine. So they start, because they're not getting any more knocks at this point, they start speculating themselves on why they think the slave quarters might be haunted. And they think that it all ties back to Aunt Agnes, like because of all the conjuring and things that she did, like almost as if because she's still there, their spirits are still there. And at that time, as they're discussing her and like her voodoo and all of that, in a separate cabin, they hear more knocking. So completely opposite. They run over there and to see what it is. Again, the doors are all locked down tight, and they're like kind of discussing it again. And as they're right at the door, that fucking door knocks right at them.
Wow.
Right at them. So you know what Dalen did? He walked to the other side of Marcus and put Marcus in front of the door. And he did it really cool, like, too. He didn't just like, you're by the door. He's just like, doot, 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 doot.
He's much smoother than I would have been, is what you're saying.
Totally,
yeah.
Totally. He was really smooth about it. Like, Marcus was just standing there the whole time, like, watching him and watching this door. It was great. So eventually they start to move on. They hear more noises. It turns out that it's cows. Again, you're outside in the wilderness. Apparently they have roaming cows out there, too.
That's weird.
So obviously they're not at the slaves' quarters like knock, 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 but they were out on the property.
No, and that's the thing about that knocking. So, okay, if there's something trapped inside, it's got to be a rodent. I mean,
yeah,
even
right.
a bird wouldn't get caught in there and survive for very long.
Yeah,
so it really could only be rodent.
Yeah.
And how are they knocking on anything? I don't know if raccoons could knock because they do have little hands.
They do have cute little hands.
Yes.
They do. I like that. And that's the first thing I thought of, too. I was like, well, I mean, if it's locked up, nobody's really going in there for any reason. It's got to be animals, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the knocking, it did sound like little hands, so it could have been raccoons.
If they do that kind of thing.
Yeah, right? We'll have to look into that. Knocking raccoons.